is joining for the first time, welcome to Filmmakers Uncut. This podcast is basically dedicated to, really diving into the minds of some of the creators in Hollywood, in the film industry, from different roles, from producing and casting to writing, basically anything that we can get our hands on to get some value for people who are new to the filmmaking world, people who might be interested in learning about directing or how they can, kind of progress their careers in the film industry. And it's been really awesome because we've been able to kind of hear all different kinds of stories, people who are younger than us, who are, working for studios, making like esports documentaries, to people who kind of, went through film school, made a very, very successful career in film festivals, and then, went to broadcast and film. And now we have David with us today. David, did you want to give them a quick little biography about, where you came from and how you started filmmaking?
Sure. Well, I was born in Ohio. I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and I always liked playing with the video camera. We had a very primitive VHS camera that my father brought home when I was about 12, and I always was just into being like a performer and being a ham and making little skits with my friends, and I just continued doing very similar activities all the way through college and afterwards. I ended up going to NYU Film School and met up with the bunch of guys and girl that turned out to be the group, The State, during college, and then working with them for a bunch of years after college. And that was sort of my basis and launching point into continuing to work with a lot of those same people throughout my career. But then continuing to do comedy in different forms and making TV shows and movies.
You've had like a very successful career, because if I'm not mistaken, your first projects came out in like 1993, 1995. That was literally like before we were born, and you've been creating projects basically like every year or every 2 years, like since up until like today, right? Like you're creating TV shows for Netflix now, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
If we can kind of reverse a little bit, I'm kind of curious to figure out, when you started filmmaking at the age of 12 and just messing around with your dad's like, VHS video recorder, was there any like pushback? Because I'm sure back in the day, it was so much harder to kind of get recognized, right? Like there's no social media platforms. Like if you're making tapes, like, who are you showing? Like
everything was definitely more of a pain. It was more of a pain to make stuff and way more of a pain to have it shown anywhere. Most people didn't even bother, really. But I mean, if you're talking about pushback from my parents, no, they were very supportive. And it wasn't really a career thing when I was 12 anyway. It was more just going around, and they thought it was funny. And I mean, the only pushback was sometimes my parents or my older sisters would come home from being out, and I would say, look at this, you have to watch this movie I made. And it was like me running the camera for 2 hours and babbling into the lens. And they're like, okay, we get the gist of it, David. And I'm like, no, watch more. I'm going to make a joke in about 10 minutes. I didn't know about editing at the time.
Right.
But no, I feel like I luckily came from a very supportive background, but then I didn't really think of it as a vocational choice until I got to film school, and I was among other kids who were very serious about becoming directors and in that kind of vocational college program. And that's when I was like, oh, I guess maybe this could really be a thing I could do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, if we jump a little fast forward from there till you being in college, what was your experience like in school? And do you think that, if you decided not to go to school back in those days, like would you still have pursued film?
Hard to say. I mean, the sliding doors of it all, but I definitely had a great experience at NYU. I really wanted to be in New York. I was all enamored with New York City as a kid, and so I was thrilled to be there the whole time. I loved being in the city, and then I was just incredibly lucky to hook up with this very like-minded group of other people, and we really pushed each other and inspired each other and learned together, and we're good friends. And so it really made the whole learning experience fun and exciting at that time. And we did sketch comedy
almost lucky in a way.
Yeah, so lucky. I mean,
Mhm.
I definitely believe that a lot of luck is involved in getting in this business. I think that it's maybe less luck than some people would imagine, but you have to go in the street to get hit by traffic. But I do think that it was very fortunate to meet the people that I did at the time that I did. But part of it is because I made the choice to go to a school where there were people doing the same kind of thing.
Right. So I just wanted to know how you found your path in comedy, because were you always just really into comedy, or were you shooting other stuff before that and you kind of just stumbled into it?
I never didn't label myself as like, oh, I'm into comedy necessarily early on. But what I did was when I first got to NYU, there was a sketch comedy group there called Sterile Yak that had just started up. And there was also an improv group called Stitches 9, both of which had been invented by coincidentally Mo Willems, who turned out to be a big children's book writer now. And I auditioned for and got into both of these groups in my freshman year. And that, I guess, started me maybe labeling myself more as like, I'm doing comedy. I'm doing sketch comedy at the time. And then the state group was sort of an offshoot of this Sterile Yak group. And so I just ended up doing more of that. And as it turns out, I've really done more comedic stuff my whole career, but was never necessarily the design.
Right. And since we're kind of just like fast forwarding, what do you think was like the turning point of your career? When was it when you were like, you went from not being that well known to, people starting to notice you more and more?
I mean, when you're inside it, it's also gradual. And I feel like there were many turning points, though. I mean, I feel like there were milestones, like finally getting to make a movie was huge, with Wet Hot American Summer. And then I would say later, like a few years later, the recognition and people actually seeing Wet Hot American Summer, which was really like 2 years afterwards, was another one. Making a studio movie with a real budget with role models was a big one. Another big one for me personally was sometime, I think it was before that, after that, I lost a big job that I really wanted, but decided not to quit. And that was sort of cementing my commitment to doing this when things were really down. I mean, I've had a lot of really low times. And then, so, I mean, yeah, I feel like there's milestones all the time.
Right. Since we are talking about the low times, can you give us like an example of maybe one of those failures you had and how it affected you and how maybe you got back up and kept working at the end of the day?
Yeah, well, after we made that movie, Wet Hot American Summer, which, was a bomb, Michael Showalter and I we were living in New York, but we traveled out to LA a lot, trying to pitch different projects and come up with different new things and trying to make something new, another movie, a TV show. And we had so many things that we went down the road on. I remember I once counted up 32 projects, and none of them happened. Every single one fell apart in one way or another. And I ran out of money, and it was just a lot of questioning and a lot of trying to figure out, okay, what now? What? But I really was committed to the work I was doing because I really still loved it. I thought I just was into what the content was, and that kept me going. And even though this thing that didn't work, I believe that you can never get too married to a specific project. You have to just be married to the larger point of like, I know how to tell stories and I'm always learning. And I still feel like, I mean, I'm 51 and I still feel like I'm at the very beginning of my education. I'm so thirsty to learn more all the time. But so basically we just kept trudging away, and eventually we were doing a live weekly nightclub comedy show in New York called Stella, and that slowly led to us finally making a pilot and then a series on Comedy Central. And that was around when I was 35 years old. And from that point on, I've been working more consistently. So I think that was probably one of the biggest milestones. Although when I say consistently, it's still, I mean, this year I have barely worked for the last 13 months. And, there's plenty of times when you're still hustling and still like, what am I going to do next? And what's going on? I'm busy, but that's
actually very profound, because anybody that would do like a quick Google search on you would see all the amazing things that you've created and have been a part of. And it's hard to imagine that from your time outside of school and your first couple of projects to where you are now. It's actually kind of hard to imagine that a person like yourself pitched 30 different ideas and got turned away. Like anybody now, like you would walk into their office, I'm sure like their eyes would light up and they're like, oh, we just hit like a gold mine. I kind of wanted to like go a little bit more, because we try to like provide as much value to people who might be like brand new, like struggling, maybe just got out of school, and they're like, I have this amazing idea and they want to get it produced and stuff like that, but they're getting rejected just like you did 30 plus times or so. What was your push? I mean, like before you. By
the way, that's still the case. I just have to be clear. Like I've been pitching projects all year, and most of them don't go anywhere. And that's still the way it is. I think that that's just part of work, part of this job. Sorry, continue.
No, I'm actually glad you really mentioned that, because I was basically just going to ask, like, what's the type of mindset you should have regardless of like whether or not you're creating work or you're getting rejected. Like, it just sounds like
it's really, really important just to separate those ups and downs from your own life and your own emotional life. Like, you have to just say, I believe in what I'm doing. I'm doing this work. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And, never take your success or your failures too seriously. I think it's really important. And for me, I've always known that if I'm going up and down with the roller coaster of my career or all the whims of the marketplace, then I'm going to go insane. And it's much better to just be like, this is me. I have my own life, my own grounding. I'm a person. I have my, my family, whatever. And then the career is just this game, and we're just trying to make it work the best you can. And when things go well, it's great.
I love that. It's very it has like a very positive tone to it,
I mean, by the way, obviously I'm not always perfect at practicing that. You get bummed out, or you sometimes get high on yourself, but I really do try to stay off that roller coaster.
Okay. Maybe something that people would really value or get value from is, along your way from like we're getting rejected, what are some tips you can give somebody who is like, going to a producer with an idea? Like how do they get somebody interested in their idea?
Well, it's interesting. My father was always involved in sales, and he taught me a lot about selling. And I think that the number one thing, which weirdly I feel like I've seen a lot of people not do, is you have to think about what the buyer is trying to do, like, and what their goal is. Look at it from their point of view, and how you can make their life easier or their job easier. And that if you're pitching to, say, a producer, they're looking for something that they feel like they can have success with and make their day easier and their life easier and their pocketbook fatter. And so you just want to come to them and say, I'm here to help that happen for you. I've seen so many people make a pitch and they're like, I really want to do this. It's so good for me. If I can, I'm dying to. And we're like, okay, that's great. But like, how are you going to help me today?
Right. That's actually a really, really good point. So for anyone listening, if you guys want to clip that and send it to us, that would be amazing. I would like to post that on Instagram later, because that's such a strong point. It's not always about just, getting the story across. You have to remember that it's a business at the end of the day. You've done producing, directing, writing. When did you learn that aspect, the sales aspect, more so like from producing? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like those different hats, do they contribute to each other as a filmmaker?
Yeah,
creating content?
In the way that I have worked most of my career, the hats are very blurry. I don't think of it as like I'm Now I'm producing, and it's a totally different job at all. I've often worked on very small things where we're all wearing multiple hats, or it's like, we're all just we're making the thing, and so you could have a lot of titles, but it doesn't mean, they're just different parts of the same job. So I guess that's how I've always thought of it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because like when you're directing, you need to be taking into consideration like the writing and how that's delivered.
Well, a director, is like a conductor of an orchestra. You have to really understand what everyone else is doing, and yes, a director's job is also partly a writer and partly a producer, for sure.
Would you say you lean more towards directing? Like that's what you are more passionate about? Because you've done so many things.
Not to belabor, but I kind of do feel like the way I do it, it's not. I have been very lucky not to have to pick or just be like, I am just a director and walling myself out that way. Although sometimes when I have done that, I really have enjoyed that. Like sometimes when I'm, hired to be a director on an episode of a TV show or something, which has not been a lot of what I've done, but I've enjoyed having only that job. Or certainly when I'm hired as an actor and I don't have to worry about the entire production, it's a really nice change of pace from what I'm used to. But in most of the real big projects that I work on, I'm just kind of involved in every aspect of it, and happily so. And that's what I gravitate to. It's just being involved from beginning to end.
That's pretty interesting. I'm very interested that like you, from your filmmaking skills, you also became an actor out of that. And now even like a well-known voice actor where, you're doing Bob's Burgers, which is a pretty funny show. How did you end up getting like into voice acting and acting specifically?
I mean, I always, I was in plays in high school and I always liked being an actor. And then when I was doing the State in college, that was us on stage doing the sketches. And I was actually one of the weaker actors in the State. I just wasn't as confident or as comfortable as the others were. Or frankly, honestly, I don't think I was nearly as talented as most of them. But I always just enjoyed it. And I, again, felt like it was just another part of the same process. And it's another way to execute your own work. I remember Woody Allen always used to saying he would so often cast himself in his films just to make it easy. Like, so he didn't have to explain to somebody else how to do it and didn't have to deal with an actor, And so I think I've heard Seth Rogen say something similar. And so I feel like it's that, but I also just, in the most normal kid-like way, I just like to be an actor. I like to be on screen. I like to be on stage. I like to do, I love the challenge of it. And I'm also, frankly, I really am not very good at it. And so I like the challenge of really, I love the challenge of doing anything that I'm still have a lot to learn at, which is everything I do. But so, and then if I get hired as an actor only, it feels like a vacation to me because it's just, you wait around in your trailer, you take a nap, go home when it's done, your job's done. It's very different than directing where you just are totally consumed.
Right, always in it.
And then, as for voice acting, that's also just something that I didn't pursue it exactly, but if I saw somebody who's doing a show, I'd be like, hey, let me do it, or, you meet someone and you're like, you got a part for me, whatever. And, but the only voice acting I've really ever done anything well with is people have just called me and said, oh, we know who you are. We think that this character on Super Jail is basically based on you, or we have a character for you on Bob's Burgers. And so I came in and did it. And it's such a blast.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And kind of want to know, how are you getting these types of connections? Was it through school you met them, or randomly you're just meeting people on a set? How did this become?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my deepest connections really date back to college in terms of the State, and that it was a group of 10 guys and one girl, and we, really grew up together from age 18 to 27. Basically, we were everything to each other and 24/7 on and off work. And so that was a real core. And then as we moved past that, our core grew into more of the community of people who were doing similar work in New York. And I was in New York for a total of 26 years, including college. And just, yeah, you meet people out on the scene in clubs and comedy world and just around socially, and built that network that way. And then of course, yes, as you work with people, you get to know them, and sometimes you forge a relationship where you want to work together again. And that's what I've done.
That's awesome. Talking a little bit about your connections, what was your favorite project to be a part of? Like, you've been a part of so many things, and I kind of want to dive into later, like a little bit about like your writing process and how you come up with such like comedic gold. But like, are there any projects to you that like really stand out, and why?
Well, I mean, they've all the big projects I've done, which has been, I guess, 6 movies and maybe about that many TV shows, like they're all, a year plus of my life, and they've all been something that I've really cared about deeply, and I really do love. I've been teased by my friends for being a big fan of my own work, but I really do like all these projects a lot. And I often am very have a great fondness for whatever the thing is that I finished most recently, just because I'm most directly connected to it, and my memory is terrible. But like lately, I've been going backwards and looking at stuff, making little videos on YouTube about filmmaking and stuff, and I just put one up yesterday about role models, and I was looking back at that and be like, oh my God, this is so funny, and so cool what we did, and so I honestly don't. I guess I'm lucky to say I don't be like, oh, that one was the really good one. I love them all.
That's awesome. That's a really good answer, because it just means that you're, putting your best foot forward for all your projects and enjoying the process every step of the way.
Well,
I actually wanted
I will say I've been very lucky that to a greater or lesser extent on almost everything I've done, I've been given a lot of freedom to make the thing I want to make, and with the collaborators that I'm working with. And there's very few things that I've put out in the world that I'm like, oh, this isn't what I wanted, Obviously, they're all filled with tons of flaws and things that I would do differently. But overall, I'm very lucky and happy to say I can proudly show this movie or whatever without reservation. I can't. That's all I can think to say about that.
It's all good. Can we actually talk about your YouTube channel? I actually love it. Like, I had a chance to do a little bit of a deep dive yesterday night, just like, making sure I knew what I was talking about before I had a chance to talk to you. And there's so many like cool tips and tricks that you are showing people who might be interested in film. So for anybody who only follows David on Instagram or only follows us, go check out his YouTube channel. Go check out his Instagram. He has all his links there.
TikTok.
He's got some really cool stuff. Yeah, TikTok, gotta stay relevant.
That's where I actually found you on the first time. I was like, this is a really good TikTok.
I've been a real convert to TikTok, I got to say. When I first was aware of it, I was like, this has just got to be such garbage. And then a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and a lot of, I think it's a pretty neat way to communicate.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually a really interesting perspective. We haven't had anybody actually talk about like, social media in that form of creating content, because it is creating content. And I think TikTok kind of like took it and then like did a line of cocaine and just started running with it, because they have like all these different effects and people are using it in such creative ways. And I guess now that you started your own TikTok, you're starting to kind of see the enjoyment in that too, right?
I mean, like so many people, I was stuck at home a lot this year, and had extra time that I didn't usually normally have. And I started by making all these music videos with friends just for fun, and like just everything I'm doing is just for fun basically. But I just started splattering out on social media all these different little experiments, and really none of them have amounted to anything, but I don't care. It's just more just playing around in public.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you were able to create like a little series on TikTok, I would definitely follow that, because some of your some of the things that you create like literally has me and my girlfriend like in tears of laughing. I like I said, I was doing research yesterday, so we like binge watched like 6 to 7 episodes of Medical Police, and I think it was like the second episode where they were talking about the virus, and then they just like nonchalantly like pull out the hula hoop and then started spilling beans into it and like stepping it around. And I was like, what is going on? It's just such a, it was such like a comedic way to describe it, but everybody was so serious. It was just hilarious. How do you come up with stuff like that? Like obviously a lot of experience, right? But like, you know, are you sitting down with a room of people and you guys are just like writing down everything you possibly can and then just decide to shoot it? Like, how does it work? How does your workflow?
Somewhat accurate. Yeah. I mean, in a show like Medical Police, it was 4 of us that, you know, we had to all come from the previous show, Children's Hospital. Medical Police is sort of a sequel series to Children's Hospital. And we brainstormed the idea of the show and the pilot. There's the 4 of us. And then we wrote the pilot episode together. And then to write the full season, we ended up, the 10 episodes, we had a small writer's room and we brainstormed out the entire story and had a bunch of index cards and brainstormed a billion jokes and a million storylines, you know, 90% of which didn't make it, but that's the process. It's often, one of the things I learned early on is it's quantity over quality, in terms of just the more you churn out, the more good stuff is going to be at the top of that list. And so, it's a lot of brainstorming. And then the jokes, like what you referred to, those can come at any point in the process. Sometimes it's in an early draft. Sometimes it's an outline. Sometimes the joke comes up in final revisions. Sometimes you come up with it when you're location scouting and you see it on the location. Sometimes it happens on the shoot day. Sometimes you come up with it in editing or post-production or when you're doing sound work. And there's jokes and there's just improvements that come at every single step of the process.
That's amazing. Do you ever like have a joke that you write that maybe didn't make the cut, but then maybe like a couple months it like comes back and you're like, I need to use this joke?
Yeah, I mean, you mean like in something else?
Like say for example, you were writing a skit that maybe never made it to air or whatever, and then you're creating a feature and you think that skit, you know, that
the idea.
Work. You ever just
sometimes you do. Sometimes you'll recycle an idea that didn't make it in something else, or sometimes you recycle an idea that was in something else. But it's weird how so sometimes an idea feels old if it is old, you know, even if it's never been seen before. And so I try to just sort of freshly come up with it each time and do something that's organic to what it is. But there's always overlap anyway. I mean, you're coming from a certain brain or a group of brains. There's going to be bits and jokes that feel similar to each other and stuff. And I have no, I kind of like that in a way. A lot of my favorite, you know, when I watch some of my heroes, Woody Allen or Steve Martin or whatever, and you see them exploring similar territory from one thing to another, I love that.
That's awesome.
I kind of just want to talk about like engagement, because I think it's like super important in any filmmaker's world. How do you keep your audience engaged in what they're watching? Do you have like specific tips and tricks for that, or does it just come naturally for you?
To me, it's just I use the barometer of my own attention span, which is small, and so I'm watching and I'm like, I'm bored, you know, or like, you know, this is not keeping in it. And I think it's also the basic rules of storytelling, which is every scene and every beat has to have a reason to be there and move the story forward. And, you know, I look at things and say, and it was great discipline doing our show, Children's Hospital, which had to be 11 minutes long each episode. And so you just say, like, does this, whether it's in the writing or in the shooting or the editing, does this scene need to be here? Would the project work without this scene? If so, cut it out, you know, and just constantly cutting down and cutting out and making things dense while still trying to maintain the spine of what you're doing. It comes with experience, but that's the basic approach for me.
Right. So do you guys have, like, for example, you have to push out an 11-minute episode. Do you guys usually have like 20 minutes and then you cut that down to like the best 11?
Well, in Children's Hospital, we got to the point where we got really good at understanding how to make it work, which was that we wrote a script that was about 16 pages, and we knew that that page count was kind of the magic number. And then we would usually, it would result in a rough cut that was around 13 minutes. And then we knew that with 13 minutes, then we go and carefully cut out 2 minutes out of that, and then you've got the episode. That was our kind of a formula we landed on. But sometimes sometimes we're like, oh my God, this is 17 minutes. What are we gonna do? And then we figured it out. But I feel like in the editing process, you always are amazed at how much more you can cut out from what you thought. You know, you watch a rough cut and you're like, oh my God, this is a 2-hour movie. There's no chance I'm going to cut a half an hour out of this. It's impossible. Everything needs to be there. And then as you go through over and over, draft by draft, you're like, oh, you know what? We actually can cut this whole scene. I never thought about it that way, but it really doesn't need to be there. And then little by little, and same thing in the writing process.
Right, of course. And I guess in the back of your head, you guys are still, the main thing is story, right? Like you're still able to tell the story that's going on without all of the stuff there.
To me, like sometimes on the surface, a lot of people look at my work and they're like, oh, it's just jokes. It's just like all funny jokes. And like the story is meaningless and who cares? And in a way, some of the jokes are about undercutting the point of the story, but the secret sauce is that we're heavily focused on the story, and every single thing is about keeping that structure alive.
Right. Amazing. Well, I kind of just want to get into your career. We had a question. What advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
It's interesting. It's hard to give advice because my beginning of my career was like in a complete other era of time, as old as it makes me sound. But, there was literally, I was already well into my career when I got my first email address. And so there was nothing, there was no internet, there was no YouTube, there was no nothing like that when I got started. So, and even then though, I would have said, and now I'd say, there are so many different paths and so many different types of careers to end up in or to go through. And of course, there's no end game either. Now more than ever, I think people have to be very flexible and keep changing. And, there's very few people just sort of land in a place in our business and just like, okay, now I'm here, I'm secure. However, I guess my advice would be, therefore, first and foremost, make sure to go to school and get a real education in basic life, humanities and history and literature and storytelling of all kinds and art. And because those are the kind of things those kinds of skills and those kinds of knowledge are crucial for anything you might do, just how to write and how to read. And those things will never get old, or be outdated. And this sort of the new platforms and the new technology, that's stuff much easier to learn as it goes along and as it evolves and gets reinvented. And then as far as just other career, like, networking and relationship making is, as always, a big part of it, I guess. And creating that situation where you have luck and associating yourself with people who are doing the kind of stuff you want to do. And if you want to be involved in big budget action movies, get yourself as close as you can to those productions, even if it's picking up garbage, because that's one way. And then another way is to make your own. And I think a lot of people I know have done both. Their day job is serving snacks on the set, and their night job is making their own tiny budget movies. And then hopefully that comes together.
Right, that makes sense. Since we did talk a little bit about school, would you recommend school in this day and age or not recommend it? Because, you know, there is a lot of YouTube now, right? Like YouTube exists where you can learn from anyone. What do you think?
It's an interesting question. I constantly myself learn from YouTube all the time. I think YouTube is pretty incredible in that regard. I'm amazed the depth and quality of content. That said, what you get out of going to a place like a film school is far more than just the content. You know, I mean, there was always the ability, you know, when I was in school, you could buy books and get the same information, but a lot of what's going to school is meeting those other people in your exact same boat who are wanting to do it as well, and have made the commitment to learn. And so you're learning from each other as much as you are from the teachers and the material. And it's just a structure to experiment and try things. That said, I think if you're really self-directed and self-motivated and can make your own community, then I do think that film school is less necessary than it might have been. I mean, I don't think it's ever was necessary, and plenty of very successful filmmakers never went to film school. But I do think a general education is more important than a specific film education.
I think that's kind of the common trend we've seen. What episode are we on right now?
12, 13.
12, 13. Yeah, on our 12, 13 episode, we've had a chance to ask almost everybody this question, and it sounds almost like everybody shares the same opinion. School is person depending, but no matter what, if you decide to pursue film, you kind of gotta eat shit for a little bit, right? You gotta network, and you gotta, you know, give it your best. That's it. And you will get discouraged in the process, but you know, eventually with consistency, it pays off.
I also do think that, like, another thing that I kind of did, and I've seen people do that's been inspiring, is just do not wait for other people to give you permission to do things. Like that's a big one, you know. Don't be precious about, you know, I've met some people in my life who's like, I've got this project I want to get made. I've been trying. This is my one thing, and I'm waiting for the financing, or I'm waiting for this or that. And to me, the people who are more successful are like, great, I have that, but in the meantime, I'm doing this, and then I'm going to make this, and I'm just going to get this out there. And now more than ever, no one's stopping you from making or distributing. Whereas it was a little harder when I was younger, but now anyone with an iPhone can make something that looks incredible, and anyone with a YouTube account can get it out to anyone who wants to see it. So no excuses.
100%. I mean, there's way more, you know, distribution channels than there were back in the day, right? Like, not even talking about television. Like, you can watch full-on movies on your phone now. It's crazy.
Sure.
Right? And there's like four like on-demand channels like Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus. So I feel like there's always content that needs to be made, and people are always wanting to be entertained. So for anybody who's listening and maybe a little bit discouraged with, you know, how far you've progressed, like, don't give up. Keep writing, keep collaborating, and I think it will pay off. I mean, Poi and myself aren't even there, but, you know, hearing from people like David who talk about how long it took for them, how many failures they went through to finally make it to a point where they feel successful, but still learning. Like, you know, I think that's
still learning and still failing all the time.
Yeah. Such a humble attitude, for real. Like, thank you
but
again.
I mean, you know, I think it's like yesterday I got a call from my agent, like, you know, this big thing that you were trying to pitch, it's a no, not happening. And then I literally, honestly, was like, okay, whatever. Like, just, you know, we just spent 2 months on that. And I was like, yeah, that's part of it. It's part of it. It's what you do.
That's so awesome. Before we get into some questions, so guys, if you have any questions, just leave it below on the Instagram. There's a little question mark. You can leave your question there for David, and we're going to get into that soon. Before that, we want to know, what's one of the things you wish you had known at the beginning of your career?
Well, what do I wish I had known at the beginning of my career?
I think another phrase for it too is, like, if you were to go back in time to your old self and be like, hey kid, like, this is what you need to know to succeed or to get whatever you want? You know,
I honestly think if anything, I would have just encouraged myself to learn and study more than I did. I feel like I was such a maker so quickly, which was it had its benefits. But I often wrote more than I read, and so I think I missed what I missed out on was I think I didn't take advantage enough of the film school education that was offered to me at NYU, because I was doing so much making and networking and less listening and learning. And I overall feel like if I had studied more deeply all the various aspects of filmmaking, acting, writing, you know, I would have been happier about that. But I can't honestly express any super deep regrets.
Amazing. And one last question: what are the best resources that helped you along the way in your career?
Well, you know, I never had a big mentor, which is another regret. But my resources for me were a lot my friends, and then just as if you're talking about like really specific things, I did take that Robert McKee class, story, early on, and read his book, and I return to that a lot. I return to those lessons that I remember from that in everything I do. Yeah, that's all I can think of.
Amazing. We're going to come up with a question. For some reason, our screen is not showing us the question.
Honestly, I kind of wanted to take a second while Poi is looking for a question. I just kind of wanted to know, like, in general, like, what are you excited about in the future? Is there anything you're working on that you just can't wait for? Are you planning on maybe like venturing into something completely different than you've done before? Like, is there anything?
Well,
like
I have a lot of,
right
well, I have a lot of sort of little dreams of things that I want to do that are outside the normal. I'm very anxious to get out of the normal, like, let's think of an idea for a movie and pitch it and try to get it made, and let's think of an idea for future. I mean, you know, obviously that's a wide range of things, but I have a lot of small and big ideas about doing things on different kinds of platforms, different scales, and I also have just, you know, I've spent a lot of the quarantine this past year doing just, you know, developing projects, and some of them are starting to finally take shape in different ways right now. And so, yeah, you'll see them come. I'm excited about all of them, and I hope
that's very exciting. That's very exciting.
Make it to your screen.
I hope so too, because I actually really like your work. We have a question here from Christina
Bella Creative.
Yeah, I'm sure you can read that there. But in your role model clip about making films, you talk about rewriting the script. Is having the script sooner something you prefer so you can be a part of the process? Have you worked with a skeleton story meant to be improv for film that is story driven? Very loaded question there.
Every project is very, very different. In Role Models, we had a writer's strike during the shoot, and in most comedies, more and more, the writing is continuing in a very big way throughout the whole process, and then there, to greater to lesser degree, there's improv on set. I come from a background and a preference for figuring things out more ahead of time, and some of my favorite projects have been very a little more structured by necessity, because of budget. Wet Hot American Summer, for example, was so low budget that we had almost no time to do any screwing around on set. Just had to like kind of get what we wrote and move on. But we had the benefit of 3 years of trying to raise money and having table reads and hearing it and thinking it through and going it through again and again and again and again and again and again. And so by the time we got to set, we had a pretty damn tight script. So I do like that way of doing it, but there's so many other ways, and I like also experimenting with different ways. And there's always room though for a great improv and, you know, or a great actor to come up with something better, either right before or on the spot. It's just part of the game is knowing what to do when.
Right. I think you mentioned one thing which has always been like a fear of mine is to be on a set and the actor goes on strike. How did you guys like deal with that?
When an actor goes on strike?
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever dealt with that.
Oh, sorry, I think he meant writer. He meant writer.
Oh, your writer went on strike. Sorry, I heard actor.
Yeah, we had a writer's strike. No, when we were doing role models, we were the writers. It was myself, Ken Marino, and Paul Rudd. And so I was also the director, and Paul and Ken were actors on the script and producers. So we all were there anyway, but it was a weird situation where we were not allowed to write. And so we had to just put our pencils down and Paul, as an actor, was allowed to improvise, but he wasn't allowed to write down anything that he might say beforehand. And so we just had to, it was a weird technical hurdle we had to deal with. And the script was far from complete when we got to shooting. And so it was challenging. And in fact, we had to do some reshoots on role models. I was thinking about doing a whole video about reshoots at some point because it is interesting. But part of the reason we had to do a lot of reshoots was because we just did not have the ability to finish writing the script while we were shooting it.
That would be a great video, actually. Yeah, if you ever make long videos on YouTube, I feel like there's so much content that you could be.
That's the thing. Like my videos are like kind of TikTok length, and I might just have to find somebody to sponsor because it's a lot of work, but I would love to go deeper into some of these things.
I mean, I think you're doing the right thing because you're talking about people's attention span, and I think you're right. People have shorter and shorter attention spans. I feel like they just kind of want the tips and tricks right away, and you kind of do that with your channel right now, like kind of showing all those awesome, like how to fake a stunt double and stuff.
But there's so many, there's actually so many stories or ideas I have for things I would love to talk about that just cannot fit in a minute. Like, it's like if I wanted to, I thought about would be kind of interesting to break down a scene and sort of show the scene as it was in the first draft, second draft, what it was like on set, what the first cut looked like, and then how it changes. But
that would actually be so incredible because I feel like one of the most difficult things to get across in film and television is comedy, because it's like you're trying to deliver humor, like fear and action is a little bit easier because you have so many, resources, right? Like you have a monster or you have an explosion, you have an
they say comedy's the hardest thing. Yeah.
It definitely is. And if you made a video breaking that down, I feel like a lot of people would benefit from it. Not trying to pressure you to, because I know you got other projects and you're busy, but yeah, a lot of people would probably benefit from doing that. Actually, since we're talking about it, maybe you can give us a little breakdown right now before we get to our next question. But when you're in the editing room or when you're working with actors and the DP and trying to figure out like the best angle or the best sequence of clips to deliver humor, like is it an intuitive process or is it more of like a team effort?
It's intuitive, it's team, it's trial and error, it's experience, it's everything. There's a lot of little tricks you learn over time. You're like, going wider on something like this probably is better because you get to see a full body, but then it could be tighter to the eye line for this shot might be better, or it'd be funny if he's sitting like that, and then an actor comes. It's part of being a director is filtering the good ideas from wherever they come and then knowing which ones to choose when. And then and then in the edit room, as you say, like I'm always stunned to this day, 30 years into doing this, that a moment is not funny. And then you slide it 2 frames to the left and then it suddenly is funny, and it's just really happens all the time. And you're like, oh my God. Okay.
Interesting. That is a very, very interesting point. We have a question here that we're gonna.
Like Tyler Terrible. Tyler Terrible says,
I read that feature script. It's bad. It's not funny. I'm just kidding.
Oh, you actually read it?
No, he's just joking.
Okay.
He asks if you get your script in front of an industry professional, is that better, or try to produce it your own? And then get that in front of a professional?
There's no answer to that question. I think, getting that first door in is very tough because it's hard to get somebody to read it. It takes me 3 hours to read a script carefully, and so I don't actually. I mean, I think that the best way to get your feature script read is to make something that gets people's attention in some way, whether it's a short or whatever. And then people are like, "Oh, I like that. Who are you?" And then you're like, "Well, read the script." And as far as should you try to make it yourself or should you try to get the industry to, try both, or every project is different. I really don't know.
I think what you're saying is just try everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly
do whatever you possibly can.
Like I said, yeah, certainly don't be like, this is the path that I need to do, and that's it. There's no reason not to, there's a point, I'm sure, where you're spreading yourself too thin, but I think for most young people coming up, there is not. Like just hit knock on every door in every direction you can until you hit something.
I think this is a pretty interesting question. Global Freeze asked, Wanderlust had a great cast and a very well acted / written.
Thank you.
Yes, why didn't it gross higher? Called out wokeness. Did studio promote it enough?
So that's a great question. Yeah, Wanderlust was a big bomb in the box office, and I thought it was really funny. I really liked it a lot. Who knows? I mean, but the answer is, I do think that the studio did not. By the time we finished it, I think they were not super behind it, and I think there might have been. I don't really know potentially all the politics involved in how that happens, but I also think there might have been a mismatch in people saw a poster with like Jennifer Aniston starring in what looks like a romantic comedy, and it is a romantic comedy, but I think it was more alt, I guess, or edgier in a way than people were expecting, and maybe the audience that was excited would be excited to see an edgy, cool comedy in a way, wouldn't stayed away from it because they're like, I'm not that interested in seeing a Jennifer Aniston comedy, and vice versa. That's one theory. It's truly just postulation on my part. But
it is a difficult question to answer because there's so many factors, right? Like it could be the political side, it could be the finance side, it could be the marketing, it could just be the demographic. It could have been
also the timing, the whims of the moment, the mood of the moment. It could be what other movies open that weekend. This is an area that I am definitely not an expert in at all. And I know a lot of people spend a lot of time really studying like, which movies come out when and how much they gross and why. And this is just an area that I have not learned about.
Awesome.
I have one last question. I know that we're kind of finishing off here. We've kind of hit almost our hour mark. And again, we want to thank you so much for taking time out of your,
it's my pleasure.
I hope you had fun. I had a lot of fun.
I appreciate your good questions.
Good questions, viewers. Thank you guys so much. You definitely helped us kind of dive a little bit deeper into David's brain. Anyways, back to my question. My question was, when you're writing like, anything, specifically, I guess, comedy, because that's what a lot of people know you for. But when you're creating, a sketch or writing something out, what are you, I guess, most concerned about? Are you concerned about like if people are gonna understand it? Are you more worried that they might think it's offensive? Are you worried that it's delivered well? I know you're talking about progressing the story. I was just kind of curious, what your main concern is when you're writing something.
I think when you're writing a first draft of something, you should be thinking about none of those things. You just got to be writing, just writing the story and feeling it, and like sort of staying out of your own way as much as you can, and just being like, this, hey, how about this happens? And then how about this? And then and then you start, then at different points or different passes, then you think about all those things you just mentioned, I guess.
Amazing, amazing. Great answer. I feel like anybody who was previously maybe stuck in writing, after hearing you say that, is probably going to, give themselves a little bit of a break and just
have no more problems for the rest of their life.
They're good forever. Thanks, David. All it took was an hour. Awesome. Poya, do you want to kind of close off here?
Yeah, sounds good. Well, David, where can people listen to you if they want to connect with you, podcast or on here?
I mean, basically, davidwain.com is my central place that I keep updated with whatever's the latest thing. I am on everything, Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and Clubhouse. But I would say if you actually want to find out what I'm really doing at the current moment, davidwain.com.
Awesome.
And I am also reachable there if you want to reach out.
You heard it, guys. So if you guys liked what David had to say and you liked his content, you want to see more of his work, go check out davidwain.com for his most recent activity. And again, David, thank you so much.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for doing this. And that's it.
Yeah. We'll wait for your next project to hit the big screen, and we'll reach out to you again to maybe do a follow-up interview with that project.
Sounds good. Good luck.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Take care.
Amazing. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to the podcast, I guess I don't have to say anything because I'll edit it in later. But thank you everyone for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you.